Excellencies, members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, friends, it's a pleasure to be here, and let me begin by thanking you and the organizers for inviting the OSCE's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, based in Warsaw, to come and visit you in Montenegro. It's a pleasure not only because coming from Warsaw, it's lovely to be by the ocean and with such lovely weather, but it's really amazing to be with such distinguished guests and panel members. My colleague Jolanta, Chicota, and myself will actually be jointly delivering a presentation today, and we've interpreted our subject, our topic, education as a strengthening instrument, quite liberally. So we will be presenting different aspects of how we relate education to politics, but there are three sort of core areas that we want to focus on. Firstly, looking at political parties as educators, and also educating political parties, specifically in the sphere of women's political participation and gender equality. Secondly, looking at a number of education initiatives implemented by different OSCE participating states in order to promote women's political participation. And lastly, to look at a case study of Poland and its efforts to introduce a gender quota law and the different educational approaches that they used in order to successfully introduce this and its impact on the most recent elections. So let me begin by highlighting that the OSCE ODIHR very much promotes evidence-based research and analysis in the area of women's political participation. And I'd like to promote one of the key resources that we've been working on and have successfully published. It's at the back of the room. It's bright yellow, very strategically colored, and it's called Gender Equality in Elected Office, a 6-Step Action Plan. This has been a very important resource for us because it not only looks at trends in women's political participation across OSCE participating states, but it also takes one step in looking at the actual concrete strategies for advocating on gender equality and women's political participation. At ODIHR, we're also extremely interested in looking at political parties specifically as actors in promoting women's political participation. We like to think of political parties as the gatekeepers of democracy, as actors that really control who accesses power, who accesses political power, and whether women are provided equal opportunities in this regard. So, and more broadly, of course, political parties play a key role because as public associations, they really represent citizen interests. And as such, they often have a special status under the law and often are able to access state resources such as funding, access to public airtime as a result. So as citizens, we have we have a stake in how political parties are regulated. And I'd like to look at two aspects of the regulatory environment for political parties. Firstly, there's the external regulatory environment in terms of legislation, the legal framework. So here we're looking at the electoral law, political party legislation, campaign financing, whether equal opportunities and equal rights for men and women are enshrined in political party laws, in access to campaign financing, in allocating state resources to political parties. But there's another aspect that's equally important and that we as citizens also have a stake in, and that's how political parties are regulated internally and whether they adhere to democratic principles in how they internally function. And this is one area that ODIHR has been looking at very specifically in the past year. So when we talk about internal regulation, what are we talking about? Well, we're looking at processes such as the candidate selection process, whether women are included on nomination boards, whether women are included in decisions regarding how party resources are allocated, whether women are involved in decision-making regarding access to party property, campaigning, campaign resources. And when we look at sort of the aspects of internal political party functioning, what we find is that these are actually processes and principles that have to do with democracy itself. It's about transparency, it's about legitimacy, it's about accountability. So it's not just about women's participation, it's about democratic principles as such. And so, keeping in mind the internal regulation of political parties, I want to discuss two aspects of education as knowledge and the role of political parties in promoting women's participation. So firstly, two types of knowledge I want to stress. First, what do political parties know about women? Women as voters, women as party members, women as citizens. And secondly, what do we as citizens, as women, know about political parties? So firstly, the first point is something actually that Sonia Lokar has mentioned on various occasions and I think is really quite critical. What do political parties actually know about women in terms of how many members of the party are women at national level, at regional level, at local level? What do they know about the positions that women hold as leaders, as selectors, as campaign members, as volunteers, as fundraisers? How many constituents voting for the party are women? How many registered voters are women? And what would the impact of this knowledge or this information be on how political parties develop a campaign strategy? And then turning to what women or citizens in general know about political parties, about how political parties function, about how they reward their members, about how they allocate resources. It seems that this type of knowledge is less easy to cultivate because political parties can be very secretive, they can be very centralized or decentralized, they can operate according to very formal or informal processes. And I just want to highlight this slide. I know you probably can't read it very well, but it's probably best because it's from a draft paper, and I probably shouldn't be showing it anyway. But essentially, what it's mapping are the different functions of political parties. So we see things like who is responsible for liaising with donors, who's responsible for recruitment, who's responsible for candidate selection. We also have who is responsible for being the spokesperson of the party nationally, and who is responsible for promoting the party internationally. So this is an example from Georgia, actually. And it's always very interesting when we hear the argument, women aren't interested in politics, because if we look at one function, which is the role of volunteers in promoting a party, this is overwhelmingly a role played by women. And why I think this slide is interesting is that it's starting to map knowledge about how political parties function. If we use this knowledge wisely, we can start to identify where are the glass ceilings for women within political parties. But we can also, on the flip side, start to map what are the entry points for women to plan a political career within a party. So I want to shift the focus from education as knowledge to education as capacity. At ODIHR, our gender team, of course I have it right here, I keep on shifting backwards, sorry. We discuss a lot what we mean about capacity, and it's such a touchy, sensitive topic. What do we mean by capacity? Do we mean capacity in terms of political knowledge, political skills, political educational qualifications? Or by capacity, do we really mean, what we know about politics, who we know, what access we have to money, what we know about where deals are made? And often we think, we've come up with the decision, actually, that both types of capacity are very critical if we're to promote women successfully as political party members. Knowledge about the political system, but also about how it works informally. So we're going to talk about capacity in two forms. Firstly, in terms of expanding the supply of women as candidates. And this is the traditional focus of many educational efforts. It's expanding women's knowledge and capacities to run as political candidates. And also look a little bit at altering demand for women as candidates. And this is much more difficult because it's obviously linked to the political culture and it's bound up in societal norms and values. So the last part of my presentation, I just want to look at a few initiatives that have been implemented in some OSCE participating states. And the first one, I'll actually do a bit of self-promotion for ODIHR. We are currently implementing a project called Women in Political Parties. And what we're doing is exactly looking at the different types of voluntary measures that political parties themselves can adopt and implement in order to promote women as political party members. I believe the member of the CEDAW committee actually mentioned that there are temporary special measures that don't just mean legal quotas. There's a whole range of measures that can be used to promote women. And we're very interested in looking at the voluntary measures within political parties and then developing these as a foundation for training for political party leaders and women candidates. This is one example of an equal opportunity initiative. And another type of equal opportunity initiative that's important are recruitment drives. And the ambassador mentioned the importance of gender equality within the United States. And a lot of the recruitment drives, finding eligible women, have been implemented in the United States, recognizing that the majoritarian electoral system can make it very difficult for women to access politics. So Rutgers University actually is implementing a program that targets women that are 45 years and older in different professions that are underrepresented in politics. And the United States are also implementing projects and programs that are aimed at recruiting aspiring younger women. And it's important to target these programs to different types of, different aspects of the demographic so that you can tailor the skills accordingly. Lastly, there are knowledge networks, and obviously UNDP is one of the founders of I Know Politics, which is an extraordinarily important resource for sharing knowledge. We also have Agora, which is a parliamentary development website. And one other aspect of educational initiatives are the combating stereotypes and raising awareness. And one interesting initiative that was implemented in Portugal was Parity Parliament, where they brought in 115 members, men, 115 women, in order to organize a policy debate on different aspects to look at what a gender-balanced parliament would really look like in terms of policy. And lastly, because I know that political parties are going to be discussed in quite a bit of detail tomorrow, I'd just like to mention online and social media. As we look at what's happening in North Africa and also recently in Russia, we see that political activism is increasingly channeled through online and social media. So one initiative that caught my attention during a recent conference of the OSCE with Mediterranean partners for cooperation was an initiative called My Constitution, implemented by a Tunisian NGO, which is essentially allowing citizens to upload onto a website what they want their constitution to look like in terms of rights. And you could see this initiative being tailored and used in order to get citizen perspectives on important legislation, domestic violence legislation, amendments to electoral codes, political party laws. So I'll end with a few thoughts about the kind of work that ODIHR is interested in focusing on in the future. The first is, actually this is an example, a really great example of a awareness-raising, capacity-building that was done in the Czech Republic, which is essentially, do you really have a choice? And it's a series, obviously, of ties, and the message is actually, we don't really have a choice in politics. It looks quite similar if we look at who are often the candidates. And it's sort of these types of educational awareness-raising advertisements that are usually the most popular and really catch the eye in terms of putting the message across. So now, lastly, just a few ideas that I'd be interested in discussing further. How to identify and capitalize on entry points and momentum, not only democratic transitions, but what are the events happening, presidencies, sporting events, cultural events, any opportunity where a country is hosting some sort of event, so that gender equality is always first and foremost put on the agenda, and that's always pushed on the agenda. Linking civil society and political society, what is the potential role of think tanks in really promoting women's political participation and engaging in evidence-based research, which is integrating the gender equality perspective, and also using think tanks as fora for sustainable platforms for dialogue. And again, what is the online and social media potential? And how do we link political activism to activism on the ground? So I think I've already spoken too much, but I'd like to at this point present my colleague Jolanta Chicota, who will introduce a case study of Poland.
Thank you, Christine, and I'm very grateful for being here, and I have an opportunity to share Polish experience. Since Poland has, similarly like Montenegro, introduced quota law this year, and it was applied to the elections, parliamentary elections in October this year. First of all, I would like to stress that since 1989, women are a minority group in Polish political life. We are an EU member, but this is the case. Representation in the governing authorities on both levels, local and national, are less than 30%, and it's caused directly by the fact that there is a limited representation of women in the governing bodies of political parties. Only 20% women are present in the governing bodies. As illustrates this graph, the proportion of women candidates, of women MPs in the lower chamber of commerce, chamber of Polish Parliament, Sejm, was increasing very slowly. And to compare to the times before the transition in the years 1985-89, it was 23% of women. So we notice the sharp downfall in the early 90s. And the direct and sharp increase we observe in the year 2001 is mainly due to the internal party quotas introduced by three main parties. This was something which really worked. In addition, other reasons were actions, of course, undertaken by women's NGOs and pre-election women's coalitions in the parliament. And also the fact that Poland started to apply for European Union membership. The public debate about quota and first introducing quota in Poland were initiated early in the year 2000, and it was related to the gender equality law, which was never adopted. Also, in 2001, one of the women parliament members of the Freedom Union proposed to include 35% quota 10 years ago to the electoral code, but it was also not successful. Only voluntary quotas by parties really worked then. Most spectacular attempt was taken by a novelist, a Polish famous novelist, Manuela Gretkowska, in 2006. She founded a women's party, but unfortunately, having only 1 year to prepare for the parliamentary elections, and she didn't have also funds, so she was not successful to reach the 5% threshold to access the parliament. But the media campaign was so spectacular that, again, the women's voice was really well heard during the debate on women's participation. Finally, the turning point came in the year 2009 with the first Women's Congress organized in Poland. Women for Poland, Poland for women. That's the slogan and that's the logo you can see. So the Congress gathered 4,000 women in the heart of Polish capital city, in Warsaw, in the largest Congress hall, Palace of Culture and Science. It was a large-scale event, perceived as one of the most spontaneous, enthusiastic, and it was a social movement beyond the barriers of political views. It gathered NGOs, individuals, politicians. It was a coalition, a joint effort, and it couldn't be ignored. Also, it referred directly to the solidarity movement, which women were part of 20 years ago, but they felt not recognized. So the activists from the solidarity movement, they took part in a council, a programmatic council of Women's Congress, and they contributed to the organization. The Congress had over 135 postulates from different spheres of life, but on the top of it was the parity, 50% of women on candidates list under sanction on non-registration. So just after the Congress, there was a Committee for Legislative Initiative, Time for Women, established, and the participants of the Congress, the regular people, also became the leaders of collecting signatures, because in Poland you have to collect 100,000 signatures for the legislative initiative. So we could see the accompanying media campaign, and we saw regular people, we saw musicians,